All righty. So day one, chapter one of PFT 109, the senior fitness specialist certification, or the lifespan fitness solutions, as we like to call it here at Sochi. Why do they have different names? I don't know. I've never known, and I'll probably never find out because I asked my boss once and she doesn't know either. So lifespan fitness solutions, PFT 109. We are looking at those materials for the SFS certification. So objectives for this first chapter, we do want to understand the adult population boom. So we are talking a little bit about boomers here. Current trends in older adult injury rates. Like we're going to look at sort of like what are some of the most common injuries, some of the most common postural distortions that we are seeing in our seniors. Rising healthcare costs associated with getting older. Obviously, like, it can be expensive to be a senior. Stuff starts to break down and, need to be repaired. And so we do want to kind of be aware of that. And then some of the future implications, like what does that mean? As we see, more and more seniors, how are we going to address the needs of this growing older population? And that answer, by the way, is of course, having more personal trainers out there in the industry. I always kind of poke a little fun at NASM here. This chapter exists in the front of literally every one of these program design classes, where it's like, it's like, here's what it means to be, and then it's like the population. And then it always justifies at the very end of the chapter of like, we need more trainers. And they literally every chapter, every one of these chapter program design classes like has that. It's so funny because it's like, basically it's the first chapter is meant to be like NASA being like, here's why you bought this certification. Like, first let's go ahead and talk about like defining an older population. What do I mean when I say senior? We talked a little bit about this, right? In PFT 106, but is it somebody who's 65 years or older, or is it somebody who just has gray hair, or is it somebody who's retired, or is it somebody who is got a certain number of wrinkles? Like how do we define senior? Like my parents aren't 65 yet, but they absolutely can, they act like seniors, like, so what does it mean? Well, if we're going to define this, it's in general, we're going to say the gradual loss of functional capacity, functional ability, but there's really no clear definition to senior here, like, my girlfriend and I were kind of like marveling at this the other day. We were kind of talking about this, but like, my nephews, right, my older brother's kids are getting into their like early 20s, and my brother took a very different route than I'm not married, I don't have kids, but my brother's got 5 of them, like, and when I was like a little kid, and so it's kind of funny, but my parents are now great grandparents. And my girlfriend, she was like, your parents are only a couple years older than mine, but they just became a grandparents for like the first time a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they became a grandparent for the first time. And so we were kind of joking about how like, different, the different sides of our family are and stuff. But yeah, like, and you look at, and like my parent, and I've met my girlfriend's parents, like her dad's a doctor, and he's taken very good care of himself. And you look at the guy, he's super energetic, and like, my parents are energetic for sure, but like also like they've lived as furniture movers, their entire life. My dad like owns a moving company, and so like moving furniture is not exactly easy on the body. And so when we look at like the functional capacity of our two different parents, like they're very, very, very different, even if they are somewhat similar in age, so how do we define it? Like who's a senior and who's not? There really is no clear definition here, but we are going to sort of we do want to be sort of familiar with a couple of the considerations here. So, one of the considerations for defining seniors could just straight up be chronological. You know, we could just say, well, it's the number of years since you were born. You know, we'll say seniorhood starts at 65. I mean, here in the US, that's kind of how it is, right? We sort of base, you know, it's like, when do you get Social Security? You know, I guess that's actually 62, I should say. You're eligible for Social Security at age 62, right? Or what about when can you receive, what is the, when can you receive your 401k without penalty? That's 55. You know, so you don't have to pay a penalty on your you know, retirement fund if you get it at 55. So okay, great. We can consider seniorhood to be some number that we put out there. You know, I think you get discount movie tickets at 65. You know, or it could be biological. So biological is sort of the amount evident by decline in the body, right? Whenever I think biological, I always think of that scene from The Dark Knight Rises, the third Batman movie, where, like, you know, he's in the doctor's office and he's like, hey, I want to go base jumping. And he's talking to his doctor and he's like, you have the knees of an 80-year-old, you know, like, that's a little bit of like biologic aging, right? Like years of being Batman is sort of taking its toll on the man's knees. So that's sort of like the amount of decline sort of evident there. Or maybe it's functional, right? This is the appearance of like mobility or strength or maybe even mental capacity, right? My dad, right? You know, you look at like the functionality of his hands, you know, years of lifting furniture have taken their toll. I would say he's got a 90-year-old's hands, you know? And so like biologically, there's been a lot of decline there, but then like functionality as well, you know? So those are sort of like, you know, what we can kind of consider to be like evidence of aging there. But there's sort of a difference between these categories, you know, and sort of how it works. There's sort of what we consider to be like primary aging, which is just, you know, gradual decline over time. You know, it's independent of disease, it's independent of environment, right? This is your typical aging. Like as we get older, we just sort of wear things out, you know, that's primary aging. But then there's also like secondary aging, which is maybe due to some pathological change. So you are aging due to some maybe disease or condition that you've contracted over time. You know, we talked a little bit about like why smoking can be so dangerous, because like obviously the chemicals associated with smoking reduce like your wind capacity. Well, when you don't breathe as well, you don't move as well. And when you don't move as well, you can end up with cardiovascular disease. So I would consider like, you know, when you look at like a smoker who might like look a little bit more run down, and then they're struggling with like both mostly like functional capacity, but like both a little bit biologic and functional capacity there. When those things are decreased, you know, that's an example of like secondary aging. This is the kind of stuff that we want to prevent, you know. I'm not, you know, your genes are coded the way they are coded. You're going to age, you know, specifically, you know, based on like your genetics, but like we are trying to avoid speeding up the process through secondary aging, you know. We really don't want to sort of lend things to break stuff down a little bit faster there, right? So we want to, if anything, we want to sort of prevent aging as much as possible, so we can maintain that that physiologic youthfulness. So what are some of the factors, right? So if we know that like we are trying to avoid some of these negative implications of aging, what can we do to sort of prevent this? Well, we do know that there's an interaction between like your lifestyle, there's an interaction between your environment, your genetics, right? I remember in school, this is kind of weird, but I was in school and I was in class, and our teacher took a special, it was like a UV black light of some type around the room, and he was talking about just like skin damage, and he was like, you know, he was like in his 50s, right? Like he's been living in Los Angeles for like years and years and years. Man, this thing is just like not focusing today. And so being that he was like older than all of us, you know, we're all in school, we're in our 20s and stuff, early 20s. I think I was actually now I think about it, I think I was like 19. But we were like, you know, he takes this light and he goes around the room and he shows like everybody's skin. And you look at like all these people in your class, and everybody's skin for the most part looks exactly the same to the naked eye. But then when he shines this like kind of UV light, you can kind of see little sunspots and little bits of skin damage that are, it's sort of like revealing where, you know, some people have worn a little bit more sunscreen than others, you know. And he goes around the room and he like, you can see like, you know, some people, this one girl who was like, she was like an immigrant from Vietnam, like very little skin damage, you know. And then like, because like, you know, there's a lot of like diet very, you know, high in like vitamin E, which we know is good on skin and things like that from that place. And then like we see like some of the people who have grown up in like Southern California, and there's like, you know, young people, but there's a little bit more skin damage, right? There's a lot more UV exposure and a lot more UV light here. And then it comes around to me, and the whole class is like, what in the, it's like, have you ever gone outside? And I was like, what do you mean? I can't see my own face, you know? And apparently there was just like a complete lack of marks anywhere on there. And my teacher started laughing really hard because he was also from Oregon. And he's like, yep, that looks like an Oregonian's face. Which, you know, Oregon has some of the lowest skin cancer rates in the country. Now, I've been living in LA for, you know, most of my adult life. So I'm sure like at this point, I've probably caught up. But it was like a very funny moment because everyone was like, good Lord, you know, and it's like, you've never been outside before. And it's like, yeah, I remember like growing up, like sunburns were not really a thing. Very often at least. So there is sort of an interaction between like your environment, you know. It can be your lifestyle. If you spend all day outside, well, you're much more likely to be exposed to that, right? Or your lifestyle could lead to you wearing down the cartilage in your knees. And then there are certain genetic factors at play here for sure. So we want to know our genetic code is going to be affected by your physical activity, your nutrition, your choices that you're making in life, right? And so physical activity obviously plays a key role in feeling youthful. You know, if you're more physically active, it's going to be easier for you to stay physically active moving throughout your life. Nutritional choices, you know, if you are eating a healthy diet and, you know, and also engaging in that healthy physical activity, that is going to sort of prevent cardiovascular disease, right? And prevent that secondary pathological aging that we're talking about here. And then just your overall choices, you know, if you're leading a healthy lifestyle rather than an unhealthy lifestyle, right? If you're getting, you know, it's funny. I don't want to be one of those people that counts their steps. You know those people who are like, oh, I got to get my 10,000 steps in today. But it's very funny, the step thing. And we're going to talk about this, I think, in the weight loss mod. You know, the step counting thing was just a marketing thing that somebody created one day. So I think like the first pedometers, the first step trackers were developed in Japan, and they were kind of a fun little thing that got introduced there. But they were trying to find a way to market it. And so they were like, how many steps should a person get in a day? And they literally just picked an arbitrary number. They were like 10,000. So the whole 10,000 steps a day thing did not start with any scientific basis like whatsoever. But fun fact, they have found that the people who do get around 10,000 steps do live longer and do have health benefits. Now, is that because of the stepping? No, probably not. It's probably just because of an overall healthy lifestyle. The same type of people who are getting those 10,000 steps are also making more physically active choices outside of those steps. But I do think that it's kind of a fun thing to look at. We know that there is sort of a correlation there, even if there's not causation, you know? So healthy choices, absolutely. So right now, and actually these statistics are a little old, but how many people are 65 or older in the US right now? Current population, we see more than 46 million people in the US are above the age of 65 right now, right? So there's greater than 46 million. That's a little bit more than 12.5% of the population, but we are expecting this number to climb to about 70 million by the year 2050. And And so that's going to be where about 25% of the population is like of the retired age. And that means that there's going to be a lot more people out there who have lived like a full life and are now like trying to maintain their health and reduce their healthcare costs and all of these things associated with aging, which tells us, and we know there's going to be social and economical cost to that, right? Because we know that seniors often are going to be the type of people who suffer from some type of health disease more often, right? So 85% of seniors were suffering from at least one chronic health condition back in 2005. And so they make up about 57% of all the healthcare costs in the US. That was about $12,500 on average for most older adults, which what is the average healthcare cost of a senior currently? What, that doesn't actually mark out. So it's about 66,000. That's interesting because this obviously is on the rise. But then again, I guess if you are 65, you are probably getting Medicare. So anyway, we're definitely seeing like the average cost would be around like 12,500 per person. I'm confused by that, but that number is only going up. So if there are so many, if there are going to be so many seniors out there, right? We know that we are going to need health and wellness professionals to sort of meet this growing need, which is why, we have senior fitness training certifications like this. We have corrective exercise certifications, which you guys are going to be experts on, and I got to tell you guys, seniors are 100% my favorite population to work with. Like when it comes to like training folks, I love senior clients. Why? Because they're dedicated. They never miss a session. They always show up on time. Or if they don't, they communicate very clearly, because like this training is a big, important part of their life. And so they are motivated, they care about their training, and they actually show up to do what they're supposed to do. And that is great. That is a super ideal, perfect client. Exactly who you're looking for. There's nothing worse than dragging a client through a session who doesn't want to be there. So I love working with seniors. Also it's kind of fun. A lot of times there's like, they're going to have aches and pains, and you got to, work to modify those things and work towards that, which is always like a really fun thing to actually work on. So like I said, we know that aging is going to increase at a very quick rate. We are seeing that speed up at a rate like we've never seen before with the sort of like population boom. It is going to have an economical burden that we need to be aware of, but we can prevent some of this burden through like healthy lifestyle choices. And we are sort of working to prevent these causes of morbidity and mortality. And yeah, that's sort of the introduction there. Any questions, guys? How's everybody feeling so far? Feeling good? All right. I'm going to open up my window here. The camera, I think letting a little more light in is going to help it. I'm also going to grab my water, which I totally left over here this morning. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of our anatomic and physiologic changes that are going to happen here, right? So what's the sort of the physiologic differences between like an average older adult and a senior? That's really what we're seeing here. So our objectives, we want to understand like some of the changes in our nervous system, our musculoskeletal system. So we are looking at the kinetic chain again. And some of the changes in our cardiorespiratory system. So what is going to move around? How are things going to alter in our heart and lungs? So your nervous system, right? Remember, by definition, we're just kind of giving this a definition here at the top. It is the communication network throughout the body, divided into two primary divisions. We've got our central system, that's your brain and your spinal cord. it is acting as the control center, right? Like its job is to sort of command everything, know how to move everything around, and respond to things, right? And then we've got our peripheral nervous system, which are all of your peripheral nerves that are sort of like gathering information to get it towards the central system so that it can make those decisions, or it's executing the commands of that central system and doing whatever it's supposed to do, right? So your central system is responsible for responding to information gathered by the peripheral nervous system and making decisions in order to tell the peripheral nervous system what to do. So the central system is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral system are all of those peripheral nerves branched out throughout the rest of the body. And so its job, like I said, to gather information and carry out the responses that were sort of dictated by the central system. So we know that there are big changes here, right? We know that there are going to be structural changes in the brain. There's going to be sensory changes in the brain, and even behavioral changes. So some of the structural changes that we do see, like as we get older, materials start to break down. They get thinner, they get they sort of decrease in mass here. And so one of the things we're going to see that is very common in the brain is a decrease in brain mass as we get older. We tend to see about a 10 to 15% decrease in our brain's mass. And that's because our nerves are actually thinning. They're getting a little bit smaller, right? And so we see we call it dendrite thinning. Remember, if we look at like a neuron, you'll see it's got, the cell body has all of these little like fingers that branch out from it, right? These are called your dendrites. Those dendrites actually get a little bit thinner, they get smaller. And so considering that your brain is just a big bundle of neurons, that actually decreases by about 10 to 15% as we get older. And so that can result in like a slower communication, that can result in a loss of communication sometimes, and that's going to affect our visual acuity. It's going to affect how well we can hear. And most importantly, probably, it affects our proprioception. So we do know that can affect our balance and coordination. So sensory changes that we sometimes tend to see, right? That visual acuity, as we get older, things get a little bit blurrier, or we'll have trouble like with peripheral vision in particular. A lot of times, like, we start to get like, as we get older, we sort of develop a little bit more like tunnel vision. And so that peripheral vision sort of disappears. Start to experience some changes with like contrast. So like, you guys might know like a senior who has like high contrast. Well, that didn't help me out at all. High contrast settings on. Well, I'm trying to find like a high contrast mode picture here. But like sometimes like if there's two colors that are somewhat close together, it's actually harder for like a senior to be able to tell the difference between those colors. And so like they'll often use like a high contrast mode or like a night vision mode, where it's like the whole screen is black and then the text is white. That's just a little bit easier to read for some people, sort of night mode there. And that kind of helps, that makes it easier. So we want to be aware of that if we are, let's say we're starting like we're training a senior client, with that lack of like visual acuity and contrast, it's very important to like, probably put your font in bold so it's a little easier to read, or maybe make the font a little bit larger. And then depth perception is another one, so balance and coordination is actually going to be further affected by that, because like your depth perception does sort of change as we get older as well, when like the lenses in our eyes sort of start to harden. Hearing acuity, the same thing. We'll see just a general loss of hearing as we get older, that classic, senior trope of big reasons we see this, we start to see like sound masking and sound localization. So what's interesting about like as we get older is some of the fluid in our ear starts to harden. And so it starts to become kind of different to tell, it starts to become difficult to tell the difference between different sounds. So they all start to kind of blend together, or it starts to get very difficult to pinpoint one particular sound and like, particularly zoom in. Right? Like you guys are probably listening to me through some type of speaker right now. And I'm sure there's other sounds around, but like tends to be easy to kind of focus in on whatever it is you're paying attention to. Hopefully it's this. And so like, as we get older, that gets a little bit more challenging. And so this is one of the reasons why you don't necessarily have to speak louder to a senior client, but it is very important to speak clearly because they might lose what you are saying mid-word, even if you are, they can hear plenty loud because it's sort of muddling together with all the other sounds out there. And then, like I said, proprioception is a big one. We see changes in our balance, changes in our mobility, and an increased risk of falling. Which is why, when we were talking about our special populations class, it's so important to focus primarily on walking with our senior clients, because that's, the main way that we get around. And so it's what we're placing our priorities on. And then behavioral changes as well. As we get older and, as those neurons in our brain start to change, we can see certain changes in like personality or our ability to like pay attention sort of decreases as we get older. Our ability to learn new skills decreases. I never learned like a second language when I was a kid, and I totally regret it now because I just do not absorb like language information very well. That's a center of our brain that's super active when we're kids. So if you can make your kids bilingual at an early age, they're gonna have a much easier time later. We see memory decrease as we get older, and then there's even the ability to like absorb large amounts of information starts to decrease as we get older. So with that, the ability to like learn new skills sort of decreases, right? So if we're trying to teach somebody how to do, let's say like a bicep curl, right? That's going to be a lot easier than trying to teach somebody how to do like a ball squat curl to press, right? And so like, if we're trying to teach that to our client, we might teach it to them in sections. Rather than showing them just how to do a ball squat curl to press, like right off the bat, we might start by teaching them how to do a ball squat. And then we do a seated bicep curl, and we do a seated shoulder press. And then eventually we do a ball squat, standing bicep curl, and a standing shoulder press. And then eventually it becomes like a ball squat to bicep curl until eventually we can kind of put it all together. And so that's a really helpful way to sort of teach that information, something that we should probably be aware of if we are going to work with senior clients. So that's sort of some of the general effects that happen as we get older. But we do know that being physically active does have positive effects on aging, right? We do know that like in the same way that like physical activity and exercise have positive benefits to us in general, right? We know that it can also sort of slow the effects of aging, right? Physical activity and particularly aerobic fitness, these things tend to slow as we get older, but cardiorespiratory exercise has been shown to have positive effects on all of this. One of the biggest ones, actually, and this is very interesting, and we don't know why. I wish I could tell you why. I wish I could tell you the reason behind this, but we do know that like cardio in particular has a really positive impact on like brain volume. So in the same way that like your nervous system sort of diminishes as we get older, aerobic activity, cardio in particular, has been shown to have really, really positive benefits to the nervous system and maintain that brain volume and coordination and stuff. We're also going to see like anaerobic exercise have benefits as well. But short duration activity has positive effects with like your aerobic and resistance training, right? But slightly more limited when compared with like long duration activity. So like the greatest benefit that we are going to see in terms of like brain mass is going to be from like cardiovascular exercise. But balance and coordination is going to be most improved through like anaerobic, short duration, high intensity exercise. So that's awesome, right? We know that exercise has these amazing positive benefits on our clients. So a combination of strength and cardio into like, seniorhood is going to have some really, really cool effects on us, and can even reverse some of those negative effects. One of the biggest negative effects that it can reverse is cardiovascular issues. I woke up this morning. One of the first articles I saw, I was so frustrated with. I saw this article this morning that was talking about how like there's a new paper that just came out talking about, where is it? Let's see if I can just find this. Yeah, NPR was putting this article out today based on some research that was done where older adults, oh, interesting. That's so funny. Never mind. It wasn't NPR. Yep, there it is. Okay, so they flipped it. They flipped it. But it used to be like they were recommending like people aged like 40 to age 59 just straight up take aspirin every day because it reduces your risk of stroke. Because the way aspirin works is it basically draws water into your blood, making it easier for blood to flow. You have more water in it, and so it becomes less viscous and it flows easier. So it was reducing risk of stroke. And now everybody's probably frustrated the way I was, and now they're immediately releasing articles against it. But I see something like that. I'm like, we shouldn't have to take aspirin to reduce our risk of stroke. We should be physically active, right? Cardiovascular disease, is combated directly through physical activity. So again, like cardiovascular issues, like, a weak heart and things like that, those things change as we get older. Our heart, starts to slow down a little bit. That's why our heart rate formula is 220 minus our age, right? That's what we're basing it on. We know that, blood vessels get thinner and also like stiffer. And so we experience blood pressure problems. And so like cardiovascular work, doing your cardio has very positive benefits on that, right? We want to be physically active. It can slow our motor neuron decline, like I said. And then we want to make sure that like we are training for like stabilization, we're training for strength, and we're training for power. Even that has positive benefits beyond aerobic exercise in terms of coordination. So while like cardio can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease and the slowing of like your nervous system in general, it's like brain health and intelligence and things like that, we do know that like stabilization training, strength training, power training, the 3 levels of NASM's OPT, those have been shown to be even better for balance and coordination. So now we've got like a 5-pronged attack, for how to prevent aging, right? If we are trying to develop a healthy nervous system of balance and coordination, a little bit of strength training and a little bit of cardiovascular exercise goes a really, 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 really long way. Let's look at it, right? Let's look at some of the effects, right? So like I said, cardiovascular exercise has been shown to straight up increase your brain volume. But if we are increasing stabilization, strength, and power training as well, we are going to have some very positive benefits in the kinetic chain. That's your musculoskeletal system, right? Your muscular system, your skeletal system, your nervous system that's controlling it. We want to make sure that we are developing all of those things. So as we get older, we do start to see that fat and connective tissue starts to replace our muscle mass. This is where, as we develop and as we get older, your body starts to go, well, if we're not using this muscle mass, I'm going to get rid of it. Now, why does our body do that? Well, it's just part of aging, right? Like part of aging is like your body your metabolism runs slower the older you get, right? This is one of the reasons why we do see like, if I go to like a BMR calculator, we just calculate out somebody's metabolism here, right? Let's say we got a 20-year-old who's 5'10", 160 pounds. They're going to burn about 1,742 calories a day. Cool. That's at base, right? Obviously, they burn more than that by living life. But let's say they're 25 years old. That number goes down to 1,717. Let's say they're 30 years old, drops down to 1,692, 35, 1,667, 40, 1,642. Let's take it up to 50, 1,592, 60, and then let's say they're 65. So that's 1,517 calories per day versus when they were 20, 1,742 per day. Doesn't seem like a lot until you realize, like, all right, well, what if they're exercising? What if they're just living like a sedentary lifestyle, not exercising regularly? Well, they're going to burn about 2,090 calories, 2,100 calories a day, right? Versus when they're 65, that number drops to 1,800. The gap gets larger, right? Because being, it's based on like a percentage of activity. So we see like a substantial difference there. If your appetite doesn't change and you still eat about the same amount of food, right, we're going to start to see body fat, adipose tissue, that extra energy gets stored because your metabolism is slowing down. The rate at which you are expending energy decreases, right? So we do see a decrease in muscle mass because you're not using that muscle anyway, right? Let's get rid of it. And we see an increase in body fat tissue. We also see a decrease in our tissue elasticity. So as we get older, we do tend to get a little bit less flexible. Ligaments and tendons start to stiffen up. And so we start to see a decrease in mobility and range of motion there. And we see a reduction of our type 2 muscle fibers. We are sort of programmed this way to get rid of that intense muscle mass, right? That anaerobic muscle. Our body sort of like loses that over time. We start to shift a little bit more towards like type 1 muscle fibers, a little bit better at endurance, weirdly, as we get older, because your body's like, again, trying to find a way to like burn less energy. And type 2 muscle fibers just burn a lot of energy. They're larger in size. They tend to be, much bigger in mass. And so with that, your body is, again, trying to find a way to sort of balance the books, right? And it can do that by decreasing those fibers. We also see bone tissue decrease as we get older, right? Osteoporosis, very common in pretty much anybody 70 years and older. We do know that that is linked to physical inactivity. So we want to make sure that we are trying to stay as physical as possible in order to maintain that. Our joints start to experience like tears, calcification, things like that. This is an interesting one that we really don't know how to fully explain, but like we do know that calcification is a very common symptom of getting older. So like your body starts to just kind of place extra calcium in certain areas. That is likely not anything that just happens as we get older. I think it just happens slowly over life, like blood's running through your entire body and blood carries calcium around, and calcium's a rock. Like it's a mineral. And so it just kind of starts to slowly build up in areas where it can kind of pool, which tends to be our connective tissue. Those are limited blood flow areas. So they also don't suck blood out of there very well. And so like little minerals get left behind. And it's one of the reasons why our connective tissue gets so stiff as we get older. And then we see decreases in muscular power. And with that becomes like, we see a decrease in just all of our normal activities of daily life. Getting up that flight of stairs is just a little bit harder as we get older, which obviously sort of, makes sense and is another one of the reasons why we put so much emphasis on walking. And then I put a lot of emphasis on like stair climbing when I'm working with my senior clients, because, that's a big part of maintaining that mobility. So those are sort of some of the negative effects there. and sort of how they interact with exercise. But let's look particularly at somebody who, let's say we've got a senior client who has maintained, physical activity through the years, right? They're just they're a master level athlete. We're going to talk about master level athletes. And I love that term so much. It's just a really cool way of saying like a senior who's physically active. It's like, I want to be considered a master athlete, so what about that, right? What about those seniors, right? Well, the effects of physical activity are huge here, right? So senior populations, they do experience muscular adaptations. Let's say you got somebody who's never been physically active their entire life, and then they get into their 60s and their doctor's like, hey, you need to start physically, exercising. So they come to the gym and they hire a trainer. They've never worked out a day in their life, that's all right. Great. Guess what? They can still experience benefits from exercise. So master athletes or seniors who exercise regularly have been shown to maintain muscle mass for much greater periods of time. If you were physically active in your youth, you're actually much more likely to maintain muscle mass as a senior. Same thing is true of bone mass, and the same thing is true of joint health. So we see a decrease in the risk of muscle wasting. We see a decrease in the risk of osteoporosis and a decreased risk of arthritis. We also see a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. So, when we look at like how our heart, and this is obviously not to scale, look at this darn chart. We look at like how our heart is sort of pumping things around, right? Your heart is transporting oxygen, right? That's what your cardiovascular system does, right? Remember, your cardiovascular system, it's your heart, it's your blood, and it's all of your blood vessels. So like the heart's pumping stuff around, blood is carrying it, and blood vessels are allowing stuff to have a way to travel throughout the body. So as we get older, we do see that like the heart is going to experience very little like structural changes. Like your heart's not going to look very different, but it will have very different functional changes, right? So the heart enlarges ever so slightly as we get older, which will lower your resting heart rate slightly. That's actually kind of a good thing, but unfortunately, like its ability to contract doesn't increase with that increased size, which is kind of not a good thing. We also see a thinning of our blood vessels. So one of the most common conditions we see as we get older, we already talked about in our last course, but arteriosclerosis or atherosclerosis, right? Arteriosclerosis is your blood vessels just getting thinner over time. Again, your body's finding a way to sort of diminish the amount of tissue you have. Less tissue you have, less energy you burn. Less energy you burn, easier it is to balance the books, right? And so that's also going to decrease blood flow to all of the tissues throughout the body, right? But as we get older, if there is plaque buildup in our blood vessels, we also start to see stiffer and thicker arteries due to that atherosclerosis, right? So we see like, that plaque buildup starts to harden our arteries, right? That's a great chart right there, right? You can kind of see it start to kind of build up there, right? And that can cause like blood clotting and, thrombosis and things like that. Leads to hypertension as well, right? We see areas of now high pressure and areas of low pressure, which is obviously, going to be very dangerous. We are also, so we do see changes in that. I got ahead of my slides here. We also see a decreased exercise intolerance. One of the things that kind of comes along with stiffer arteries are, we see a decreased ability to dilate them and constrict them, which means that like when you start exercising, you're going to feel much more out of breath much more quickly, or much more tired much more quickly, because like those blood vessels are not dilating to get blood flow to the areas that need them as easily. We've talked about this before, but when we exercise, right, we need blood flow to go to our skeletal muscle, the stuff that's moving us around. We need blood flow to decrease the things we're not using currently, right? Like the digestive system, for instance, kind of shuts down when you're working out. It's why you probably have noticed you don't usually have to go to the bathroom as often in the middle of like an intense workout, And then once you're done, you're like, oh, I gotta go. You know, that is, you know, that system, you know, isn't a priority during the physical activity. So it kind of slows and doesn't function quite as quickly. That is the same thing as we get older. We see that decreased ability to do that, like dilate or constrict those blood vessels, makes it harder to control that blood flow. We also see a decrease in our lung tissue elasticity. As we get older, our lungs actually start to be a little bit stiffer, you know, especially if you've been breathing in like certain chemicals throughout like the course of your life, smoking or things like that. You know, that's going to build up on the inside of our lungs, right? Like this is meant to move like pure, you know, gas into and out of the lungs. But if we're putting like particles of stuff in there, you know, we all live in LA, you know, and LA is a lot cleaner than it used to be, but like, you know, there's still certainly like smog and things like that, right? And so if we see like that smog get into our lungs, it can stiffen that tissue and make it much harder to sort of move around. If we see like in our respiratory system, right, which are, you know, supposed to be all of these like blood vessels going in, and then this hollow network of tubes that are exposing those blood vessels to, you know, gas like oxygen, right? One of the things that comes along with that decreased elasticity is that your alveoli can actually burst. You know, your alveoli are meant to be these like, you know, little popcorn sacks, right? But what happens is if the walls actually like break down, you know, and things like that. Well, that's actually a picture of pneumonia. Hold on, that's not what I want. Well, oh, there we go. Yeah. So you can see right on the left over here, right? This is healthy alveoli, right? It's got all these little pockets. And so there's a lot of surface area for blood to be exposed to oxygen. But if we break those walls down, there's actually less surface area. Look at the number of arrows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 versus 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, when that breaks down due to like some type of pulmonary disease, it lowers our ability to like expose oxygen to our bloodstream. It's very dangerous, right? This is one of the like things that they are worried about in like long-term side effects of like COVID, for instance. Luckily, COVID's a little bit different. So it doesn't necessarily always result in this, but it is something that like they are, you know, observing over time. It'll be interesting to see what happens in, you know, 20, 30 years. So we see that decreased surface area and a reduced capacity to bring in that oxygen. Oh, and then as we get older, you know, decreased muscle mass, decreased strength. We also see a weaker diaphragm, which is going to make it harder to drive air into our lungs and stuff. And so that's a decreased ability to exercise, decreased ability to walk and function and move in everyday life, right? So again, it makes sense that we are going to train our senior clients, right? It makes sense that they're going to start exercising because we know that exercise reduces our risk of coronary heart disease. We, you know, put stress on our heart, so our body goes, oh, wow, I need to keep this thing strong. You know, we put stress on our blood vessels, you know, by like needing blood flow to go to our muscles. Our body goes, great, let's keep those blood vessels, you know, keep their ability to dilate and constrict, right? So we reduce our risk of heart disease in 2 different ways there. We increase our stroke volume, keep the heart nice and strong, which is great. And remember, your stroke volume is how much blood is ejected from the heart. If you are strengthening your heart, it's able to eject more blood every time it squeezes. So the greater the stroke volume, the more efficient your heart is, and it can beat less often to get the same amount of work done. So we are going to be talking about how to write programs for senior clients that are going to address not only strength training, not only balance and coordination, although yes, those things, but also cardiovascular disease, bone health, muscle health, all of it, right? So we do know that as we get older, we are going to see neurologic changes, and that's going to change our response speed. It's going to change our ability to memorize and learn new skills. And that's why we as trainers got to be aware of that, so we can be patient and, you know, make sure that we're not giving somebody like a super complicated exercise at first. We're going to experience musculoskeletal changes, and so we're going to try to combat that through exercise. We're going to, you know, try to increase muscle mass. We're going to try to increase strength, prevent a loss of bone mass, increase mobility. We see cardiovascular changes, and so we're going to do cardiovascular exercise regularly in order to increase that heart, the strength of our heart and our stroke volume. And we're going to try to increase our lung capacity and ability to, you know, let's say you lose those alveoli, so you're not getting as much like exposure to red blood cells. Okay, well, you know what? That's a bummer, and we can't fix that. But what we can do is we can make more oxidative enzymes and more hemoglobin in your red blood cells. So we can make the red blood cells that are being exposed to oxygen better at carrying that oxygen. And that's a benefit of physical activity and exercising. So I may not be able to reverse emphysema, but I might be able to reduce its effects. So that is where we are headed. There is your intro day, guys. We are going to be, this is a 10-day class, or a 10-day sort of process here. I guess 9 days, considering the teacher work day. But yeah, any questions today, guys? You guys all feeling good?
Good, yes. I mean, we definitely need more practice. Other than that, it's good. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Love that. All right, well, let's go ahead and kill the recording.